Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the show. I have with me today Chris Bergh. He is the CEO and head chef, no less, at DataKitchen. He's here to talk to us all about and talk to me all about DataOps. We're going to kick that topic about how you use it in conjunction with your data strategy, what it is, how you use those things to influence your organization, get business value. Very excited to have Chris here with me. So, Chris, welcome along to the show.
Oh, thank you, Jason. Happy to be here.
Wonderful. So, right, let's get kicked off with a little bit about you, and then we'll take things from there. So, if you could just introduce yourself to my wonderful audience, that would be brilliant.
Well, welcome. Thanks for having me, wonderful audience. My name is Chris Bergh. I run a company called DataKitchen in Boston, Massachusetts, USA. And so we focus on something called DataOps, and we've been working on it now for about 7 years. And the interesting story is, like, how do we get to focus on DataOps and why we think it's so important and why we're spending 7 years on it? Maybe we're crazy. And I guess it kind of starts with my co-founders and our background, and specifically my background. I'm kind of a kid who grew up in sort of the industrial heartland of the United States. My dad was a telephone repairman. I worked my way through college. And what I noticed there is there's a lot of manufacturing companies in the 80s and went out of business, not because they weren't producing good products, but because they were out competed. And specifically, there were a lot of auto manufacturers. I don't know if you remember the AMC Pacer. It was a really bad sort of bubbly car, had a jeans version in it, and it ran for about 50,000 miles and then sort of caught on fire. And my dad bought a Toyota Corolla back in like 1979. And I have a lot of good memories from high school in that car. But he took a lot of flack for it because he was a union guy, and driving a Toyota was seen as un-American. And he was like, it's cheaper, it's better, it lasts longer, I'm going to buy it. So why did American Motors go out of business? And why did Toyota become one of the biggest auto manufacturers in the world? And I think that's one question that sort of lived in my mind. And then, I taught for a while in Africa. I went to graduate school, and then I started to get in the software industry. And I worked at companies like MIT Lincoln Laboratory, NASA Ames. I did a tour at Microsoft. I wrote a lot of code, managed a lot of teams, and I was really struck with, like, how do you lead people, especially when you're working on kind of a big technical thing. And then, I got older, had a family, and about 2005, I thought I'd do this data and analytics thing. And I thought, oh man, it'll be a bit easier than software. I mean, software, it's super hard. And I found out it was just terrible hard. I mean, things were breaking left and right. My boss never thought I could go fast enough. I had data engineers and data scientists and people doing data viz on my team, customers with thousands of people using our analytics. And what I learned is really that, like, things break. You really can't go fast enough to give insight. There's just an insatiable demand of all forms, models, visualizations. And the teams I work with, they love their tools. And, I just never want to have an R versus Python or Tableau versus Click comparison discussion in my life. And so those three themes sort of went through and a lot of them resolve around leadership and how do you get a group of people who are working on a shared technically complicated thing, whether that's a manufacturing line, whether that's software, whether that's data and analytics, to actually deliver value quickly, to innovate, and to iterate. And so that's really the themes of DataOps. And so when we started the company 7 years ago, and my co-founders and I have these similar experiences, we sort of poured those into talking about DataOps as a thing and building a software product to support it.
Yeah, I like the thanks for that summary. And the leadership is something I'm super passionate about. I know that without good leadership in data and in many things in business and the wider world, you really can't get the outcome that you want, even with great people sort of doing the day job. But leadership is beyond just leaders. It's the way that we all lead the things that we do. And I'm a big believer that data, in some respects, has been lacking that, but in other respects is what really will help drive it forward. And I think this concept, and let's talk about this a bit more, of DataOps helps to bring that idea to the table, and as you say, help deliver stuff quicker, more effectively, more efficiently, with less headache and less heartache. And what more could people ask, really?
Yeah, yeah, and leadership is hard, right? Technical leadership is hard because if you're fortunate enough to have these, skills to be able to do data and analytics or software, right? You're kind of naturally an oddball anyway, and like leading people is very counterintuitive when you'd actually prefer to spend 5 or 6 hours in code doing the work yourself.
Yeah.
And so, like, I had to learn how to lead people, and I think there's a particular form of leadership around technical environments that's very different than perhaps maybe leading becoming a politician. And I think it has to a lot has to do with sort of helping people with their fear, helping being honest. And some people call it safety culture, and really being of service. And so for me, it's my own journeys. Learning to lead people is really inexplicably mixed up with learning to lead technical people, because I'd be a lousy politician, but I'm a pretty good, I think, leader of technical people, because I think it helps to be technical, but it also helps to think about that thing that you're working on as sort of a living thing that's independent of your team. And how do you, because it's so complicated, whether it's a manufacturing line or software or a data and analytics system, no one really knows exactly how it works. And maybe a few people have the whole system in their head, but we're all sort of touching the elephant. And
Yeah.
what happens when it breaks? What's the optimal way to change it? How do you interpret what the world's asking you and make your system do that? And those are
Do you think
very interesting management principles to work with.
they are? Do you think people care about how it works as long as it works? I'm talking of people who use the thing. There's often a question or debate or discussion that happens about, but well, how does it work? What's it doing? What's under the hood? When in fact what they mean is I'm not getting what I want, so I need to understand it so they can help improve what I get. Do
Yeah,
you think people
yeah.
generally care? Obviously, there's some people that need to care, and there's some people that are responsible for caring. But in the sort of broadest sense, that people care, need to care.
Some people are generally interested, but business customers
Yeah,
don't really give a damn, how it works, right? They just want the result. And I
yeah,
spent years trying to explain how things worked. And in tech, it's really weird because some things are easy and some things are like step function hard. And to
yeah.
explain someone who doesn't know that, you can just talk yourself blue in the face and they still think you're an idiot, right?
Yeah.
And so
And
I I
the irony on that is that the things that sound easy are hard, and the things that are hard are normally quite easy.
yeah,
It's sort of a
yeah, and it's
misalignment
like,
of expectations.
yeah, and I worked for a boss for many years who was a physician, and he was always gave me this look like I killed a patient on a table. Like I'd say, "Hey, David, it's gonna take 2 weeks," and he'd look at me like, "Oh, Chris, I thought that should take 2 hours."
Mm,
And yeah, and I thought he was a jerk, and I rebelled against him. But in some deep way, he was right that
mm,
things should be quick, and
yeah,
customers always want more. And so how do you live in that world and not end up kind of feeling bad about yourself and your team? And then as a leader, like one of the simplest ways to fix things, at least I thought at the beginning of my leadership journey, was to fire people and blame others, right? And so what I've realized is that, like reading Deming and thinking about factories, is that the only thing you own as a leader is the system that your team works in,
yeah,
the set of processes, the attitude that they have. And that's really what you control. And you need to work on that as a thing. You need to
yeah,
work on the how and not the what. And
yeah.
how you do things, I think, is a very important part, and what empowers people, and what can help you deliver value.
This data ops thing, we've had some lots of offline discussions about this, and I know we've sort of got some good opinions and thoughts on it. But why? How does that help? How does that help this situation in terms of getting faster, focusing on improving the pace, getting better quality out the other end? How does data ops help that?
Well, that's a great question. So, well, think of that Tuesday morning when you go into work and you get that email from your boss's boss saying everything's broken, or this chart looks weird, and your
Yeah,
heart sort of sinks. And then you've got to go and figure out why, right? And was it the um, visualization team did it? Is the model acting wonky? Did the warehouse break? Did somebody give you crappy data? And you've got to go through this triage process to find it. And your team, and it's sometimes your best people doing that. And I think that's, data ops is meant to help that situation, and make it so that things are right before your customer sees them, and that you can answer that quickly. And then the other part is when you go into, you've done some great work, you're delivering an analysis to your customer, and they have 10 follow-up questions. And I've seen too many really great people kind of slunk out the meeting with 10 follow-up questions. And I'm like, that's amazing.
Yeah.
You've got 10 follow-up questions. That's great that you've provided value. They want to know more. And then people say to me, well, it's going to take me 4 months to do it. And I still have to keep what I've delivered going. And how do you, both those things just are absurd to me. Worrying about things breaking and having to deal with the finger pointing and going on, and then not being excited and being able to service a whole bunch of follow-up questions. We really have to change that, because analytics is a river of questions. We are having more and more complexity in our system, and being able to iterate and innovate and not feel downtrodden at when we're presenting to other people in our company. Because I find more than one data team has kind of put on the hair shirt of like, it's data. I'm gonna have this burden, and that's not right, or they're just downtrodden. And I want to help fix that. And I think DataOps is a way to kind of reclaim control and empower your team to do better.
In what ways can it do that? So are there a bunch of like overarching principles that it can help, that you can help put in place with it? Is it a bunch of technical things you do? Is it, from your perspective anyway, is it a bunch of processes? Like what is the thing, and how does it help those problems?
That's a really deep question. And I think for me, I think analytics is a river, right? You're always paddling the river trying to get to the next question. And so how fast and how you can navigate that river is really important, because in some ways, I think being humble about what you think the world knows is and what you know is important. Because if you take and do some work with data and present it in front of a customer, you may be right, you may be wrong. Maybe the data tells, maybe it's of value. And how fast you can iterate through those, how fast you can move down the river, is actually the huge determinant of your success. And so don't spend 3 or 4 months building something that you think works. Give something in 2 weeks and learn, and then learn and iterate. And that process is actually really hard in data and analytics, and it's really hard emotionally for some people, but you end up giving a much better result. And so iterations mean innovation, iterations mean empowerment. And so how do you live in a world of constant iteration and service?
Yeah, we see the move from thinking about a finished output to this kind of start small, iterate, grow, and improve something. That's still quite new to, I think, the data world. You've been going at it for a number of years, clearly, but I think the reality is sort of digital product development has been there for a while. Embedding iterations, agility into the process from day one. Data's trying to like retrofit this into a reporting and data warehousing world that's been around for a number of years, that never really delivered on the promise. Obviously, it did in some circumstances, but not sort of broadly necessarily. And so this idea of agility that you talk about, is iterative nature, these short, sharp deliverables. This idea of like create version 1 and then dot releases of even a sales dashboard is quite new to people. And that requires not only the team that are doing data to become that way, approach it in that way, but it requires sort of everyone in the end-to-end chain of needing it through to creating it and looking after it to be on the same page. That's quite hard, right?
It is, right? Because it has a couple of things that are hard for people, right? It's get 70% right. Well, that means it's 30% wrong. Am I going to get blamed? Am I going to get demoted? And try quickly and iterate. Well, that makes me look bad that I don't know the answer in the first place. But the reality is you actually end up maximizing the amount of work you don't have to do, because your cycle time is short. Therefore, your learning rate's up. And so, and what we found is that, agility is a combination of 2 real things. One is sort of this people management process where it's agile development or Kanban, and software's done a good job, and you can go to a library or a bookstore and see a whole shelf of books. But it's also a technical environment that enables you to do it, because you can end up having they call it Wagile or Potemkin Agile, where you're talking the words, but it's really slow and waterfall. And so it's a very simple set of principles that people have to apply, but they're actually really hard in a number of different ways. But what happens is, I was just talking with a guy who led in the software world where the 6,000 person IT transformation over a period of 3 years. And what he said, that the thing that he reflected on is how much it made people's work more enjoyable, how much they just liked their job. And I think the same idea here is you just like your job because you're having more impact and you're having more customer interface, and you have more control of your destiny. And so I think it's a better way to work. I don't ever want to ever work in that same way. And that's sort of why we wrote the DataOps manifesto. Partly it's a little marketing, and partly it's like, this is the way that we want to work, and like, we're never going to work in another way because it sucks.
God, that's the first time you mentioned the manifesto. So is this ingrained in your head? You can reel it off for me.
Well, I can tell you.
Or certainly the principles of it. Yeah, go on. That'd be interesting.
I mean, DataOps is basically a ripoff of lean manufacturing and agile and DevOps from software, right? We just said these ideas are really good. We should take them and transfer them in domain. So we took the Agile Software Manifesto, some DevOps writing, and our own knowledge of data and analytics, and sort of mix the three piles of cards together. And our first pass on it was to take the Agile Manifesto and take software out and put the word data and analytics in. And we're like, that's kind of there. And then we just kept iterating on it. And we added some points, subtracted some points. We tried to get a number of people sort of involved in it, and we did at the beginning. So we've had over 10,000-12,000 people sign it so far. And it's just a way of saying that this is the right way to work. And it's a little marketing, honestly, but it's also it's something that we really truly do believe.
I think you're underplaying it, Chris, in terms of it being marketing. Of course, something that a software company comes up with and puts into the market and drives community. Well, of course, that's helping drive attention to your world. But I think having some underlying principles in the same way that Agile did is really important, actually, and it gives people something to hook to and sort of get sort of instantly. And I think using those to help explain, it's a good way of explaining what we mean by, even if you call it DataOps or not, explaining the concept, the principles that we're going to live and abide by, and it's easy to share, easy to explain. I think yours or something like that is actually really good for something in this space that captures how we move quicker, why it's worth moving quicker, how that creates a more adaptable business and adaptable strategy. I think that's really important.
Yeah, it is. And so it's really funny about our characteristics. Like, I think in principles, I think in data, right? And if I'm going to have an argument, let's go to first principles, present the data, and then we'll figure out the right answer. And I actually think that's an odd case of humanity. Most people think in stories or parables, right? And I think storytelling actually drives much more human behavior. And it's ironic to say someone who spent so many years trying to get people to argue from data and principles. But I think and one of the reasons I think it's important to talk about the stories and the emotional content is that I've been talking DataOps for many years, and almost every time I give a talk, I get someone come up and with almost sort of telling me their struggles and saying, I've put a name on it, right? And I think that's actually one of the things that gets me up in the morning is people are really trying, and they're in that same situation I was in 2006 and 2007, where their data providers are giving them crappy data. Their boss thinks they're an idiot. Their employees just want to run and do their own thing. And like, you just end up hating your life and hating yourself. And I think that's not an acceptable thing for a leader to do. And principles can help you transform how you work.
So here's the thing. So I think a lot and spend a lot of time talking to my team about how DataOps fits into data strategy. And I'm a firm believer that yes, there are some components of DataOps that are implementing things, changing things, implementing technology potentially and software, but actually the principles and the concepts of DataOps around agility, adaptability, reusing code, automating where you can, short sprints, iterative development, thinking outcome first, these software engineering principles that you talked about, all of that kind of stuff is what makes your data strategy faster and better and deliver more. So I don't think that there's data strategy and data ops. I think they're really sort of two sides of the same coin. You use data ops to help deliver your data strategy in a way that is just a better way of getting to strong outcomes faster and more effectively. Do you see there being a difference? Is it one and the same thing? Why did you need to come up with something else? Why didn't we just say this is how we do data strategy?
Well, I think what you said is very well put, and I think one way I think of it is there's a part of strategy which is what you do, right? Mm-hmm. And so it could be, we're going to approach this data set, we're going to minimize risk in this area, we're going to go to the cloud, we're going to build this technical platform, and we're going to apply these algorithms. Those what's are really important, what data set, what you're going to do. But I actually think as a leader, the only thing you really control is the how you do it. And I think part of your strategy has got to be how. And so, because I think, and everyone on the team should feel ownership of that how, because we're not only doing a bunch of particular models and visualizations, but we're building a system to work in, a set of processes to work in. And everyone in the team should own that. And in fact, that in and of itself should be something that you can iterate on and improve. And so the recognition of the how that you do things is really what the team owns, that it's really your prime impact on as a manager. And that seems to me to be as prime importance in any strategy, and to recognize that it has value and not for sort of lesser beings. Because in a lot of organizations, how you do it is like nights and weekends, maybe we think about it later. And this idea of reflecting upon it and finding ways to improve. And I think sometimes that's missing in some people, because we're just like, we have our list of to-dos. I got to do this, do this, do this. It's all about the what and not about the how. And I think if you make time for it, you end up building a set of systems and processes that can help you deliver more of the what's that you've got to get done.
Yeah, it's because we speak to quite a few clients where the thing that's been missed is that the process, the method, the how, we call it operating model sometimes. It's part of a pillar of a good data strategy is to not only put the people in place, and the skills and build the teams and the technical capability and all those good things that you need, but explain and articulate and define purposefully the approach that you're going to use, the how, in the way you were just explaining. And just sometimes some small tweaks to the how has almost disproportionate impact to the outcome, and solves disproportionately amount of problems that frankly were because we'd never really sat back and gone, well, how should we all work? How should this team interact with this team? How should we move from idea to execution? How should we move the data through the value chain? As you say, often the focus is on building things and putting technology in place and the what's in your language that they forget about. How does that all hang together?
Yeah, and I think it comes out like part of data strategy is data architecture. And, I want to like bang my head against the wall the next time I see a production only version of data architecture that doesn't talk about how to change it, right? Because things are constantly going to change. And so I think it is a very different, almost a different philosophy that I've arrived at over years of work and experience. And I think it's something that people can pick up. And I think as a leader, it's actually very empowering. And my own experience is I've actually back in 99, 2000, when I was doing software development management, I sort of pushed back on it, honestly. There was one engineer who was really, this Agile Manifesto thing. I'm like, no, we're going to ship software every 4 months. Why would we do it in a week? That's insane. And he was right. And over years, I learned. And also, I learned the importance of, back in 1999, we had one person on the team who released our software into our SaaS product. And he played the mandolin. He was actually paid less than everyone else on the team. And that sort of operational side was it was for lesser beings. And what happened in software is that people said, okay, how you do it's important. And the people who work on the how went from release engineers to DevOps engineers, went from being paid less to honestly being paid more. Because a good DevOps engineer in software is one of the highest paid people of the team. And the system at which you work to deliver value, to deliver features, value, is so important that let's get people working on it. And in some studies, 28% of the people, a quarter of the people who are actually working in software are actually working on the how and not on the what. And they're not working on the details, the next feature. They're building systems to make it faster. And that ratio shocks a lot of people in data and analytics, because like, if you think about it, the people who are, we all have task lists and we're all focused on the what's the next thing I got to do? I got to do this. And we all have a backpack full of requests from our customers that we're constantly trying to unpack. And the thought that we should actually devote time to building systems to make that easier is it scares a lot of people. And the reality is that it takes time to do that. It's not magic, and you've got to invest in it.
And I mean, one thing we haven't really touched on is that the key component of any data ops or data strategy or doing data analytics, whatever phrase you want to put around it, is about business outcome. And I think the important thing about data ops is obsessing about and focusing on that business outcome and the value that you want to deliver, the value that the organization is trying to deliver. And then go, well, how do we make getting to that value fast, the time to that value fast? And there's loads of small things to do in order to make that happen. And it gets harder as you scale. It gets harder as you're doing more. It gets harder as you build more models. It gets harder as there's more touch points with your end, customers. But baking that in early in the journey definitely helps that, doesn't it? It sets you up on the right path if you sort of have that mentality, from day one. Again, rather than trying to retrofit a different way of working down the line once you sort of scale to a bit of a beast.
Yeah, and value is really like a hot knife that cuts through a lot of things, right? Because there's a lot of deferred value building in data and analytic teams. It's like, I'm going to go and build this platform, and then a year later, we're going to be able to deliver value, or 2 years later. And I've seen teams of hundreds and hundreds of people building platforms and not delivering value. And the hot knife that cuts through it is like, deliver something, get it in the hands, and then learn from it. And if you do that, that one philosophy, I think makes a lot of difference and changes it. And I still see organizations that are in that, we're about building systems and platforms, and value is going to come later. And that's a really hard thing for some organizations to change, to focus on. We got to get something in the hands of our customer quick. And like, for me, I guess I've just grown in, like, if you're not delivering value every week, bad things are going to happen. Like the hair on the back of my neck stands up, like, 3 weeks later, they're going to fire us, something like that. And maybe that's extreme, but that's sort of what I feel is like.
Well, I think the challenge there, isn't it, is that small value more often, you're not going to deliver a Rolls Royce or a Ferrari overnight, but you can build something that gets you towards that, and that adds value, that improves the situation, and then you're iterating towards an end goal. And that's a change in mindset. You can kind of understand why people, they want the end thing. But I think the big thing here is that not everyone knows what the end looks like. And in fact, with most things, there is no end. This is a perpetual, potentially always improving. If you're building a model that predicts the next best thing to sell somebody, that's never going to stand still. So that there is no end state. So it makes sense to base that on one data point, and then 2 data points, and then 10 data points, rather than trying to build the thing that has 50 data points and complex machine learning built into it, that takes you a year. Get something out in a few weeks that just improves it a little bit, and then a little bit more. And the efficiency gain there is immense.
Yeah, and you're navigating a river, not building a house and walking away, right? And I think that's super important to get. And that idea of delivering something to your customer so you get feedback in those small chunks, those small course corrections, instead of the sort of big strokes, I think is it's harder for people to get, but actually it ends up being better. And I think it's hard in a couple of ways. One is like, it's sort of, you have to be kind of out there. You've got to sort of take risks, right? And it's not right. And I think your customer has to be involved in it too, right? They have to be, or some proxy of a customer has to be involved in it.
Well, it's not doing it to you're not doing this to somebody. You're working collaboratively to deliver value to the person that is going to interact with it the most. you're doing this together. You're starting with that rather than trying to, I had this conversation with somebody else about the adoption. So we need to drive adoption of our dashboards that we've built. You're like, well, if we're telling people and forcing people to use something we've already built, then we've missed the trick a little bit. We should involve those people in creating something that is valuable, so that it's not about adoption. It's about how do we make it even better and improve their world even more. Just remove adoption as a problem. And if you start with the people that are going to use something and work back from that, you don't worry about adoption. You're just going, is this the best thing that can, rock their world and improve their world?
Yeah, and it's like, it is really hard to be in a position of not power but influence, because ultimately every data and analytic team sits on a pile of data, and everyone else you're trying to influence the organization to say, hey, this data can make a impact in your life. And maybe it's an end customer on a website, or maybe it's the sales and marketing team. And influence is really hard, actually, because you can't tell people what to do, but you've got to discuss and change their mind. And I think there's a set of skills that I've learned over my career in influencing skills. And some people say leadership is just influence. Like, if you're able to influence people, that's really the best form of leadership. And I think and we've got this double bind with data and analytics, because you're not trying to influence the customer with the right dashboard, but also the data itself can only tell certain things. And in software alone, well, okay, you tweak the HTML and you can do anything, but like, the data is going to tell you what's there or not. And you've got this two levers that you're always constantly trying to get right. And does it actually say? And I found the hardest thing in data and analytics is when the data doesn't say it. And you're like, well, you want the data to tell you the story, but you know what? It's not, there's not enough data points. We can't integrate the data set. Sorry, it doesn't tell that story. And it's frustrating, but it's also an important thing, because that also propels the organization to maybe acquire new data or treat their data with more respect, so they actually can create the data that can answer that question.
Yeah, I think that creates an opportunity. I always talk about the fact that when people are designing end user applications, they mostly designed around the interaction of the end user and the data entry, not what we want to do with the data out the back of it. And really, you're only ever collecting data to manage a process or to do something with the data. But when we're building applications, often that bit's forgotten, and it's at the end like, oh God, what data do we need? Oh, what reports do we want? And you're just on the wrong conversation by that point. I'd love to see applications being built with, what do we want to do with the data first, and then right now let's design it based on that.
And I spoke at the DevOps Enterprise Summit meeting 2 years ago, and I made that very point, is that DevOps is about developers and operations, but you've got this other customer here. It's the data team, and you're forgetting that they exist, right? And you change your schema and change the meaning of the data, and you don't tell them.
Downstream impact.
And you screw them up, and like, okay, they've got to build all this defensive code. And I think that's one of the also interesting things is a lot of data teams take data from the applications they develop, from internal customers, external customers, and we all have to deal with this rampant set of crappy raw materials, or sometimes great raw materials. And just like in manufacturing, your suppliers are incredibly important, right? And working with your suppliers to have better data and have them understand, I think is part of what makes the job challenging and interesting. And so I would encourage anyone who's building, like you said, anyone who's building a transactional system, think about your data customer.
Yeah, great analogy. Cool. So as we think about wrapping up, I wonder if you can summarize sort of 2 or 3 top tips for people who are looking to accelerate the delivery of value through data analytics. So what are the 2 or 3 key things that they can sort of think about or do tomorrow that will really help improve things?
Well, I think for you as a leader, it's start thinking a lot about the how you do things with your team. And one of the important things, first things you can think about the how is, well, how many errors are you having in your system? Bad data, broken things, late. And one thing I tell people to do is just make a list and track your errors. And then every 3-4 weeks, have a meeting and pick one thing on that list to fix. That's it. And so love your errors. And then the second thing is try to look at how long it takes you to do stuff. What's the time from your idea into the hands of your customer? And every 3 or 4 weeks, take one thing and make that faster and easier. And I think those two things, it's because it's really about loving your errors and focusing on cycle time. And if you can do that, those are two big hows that you can help improve your team and improve your outcome.
Brilliant. Love that. So I like particularly the last one, or the second one rather, on track how long things take, find one thing to fix and fix it. That is certainly not just a data thing. I think you can do that in running a business, in running a team, in building a house, anything that can make you more efficient, make you faster, make you better. Fix one thing at a time, little and often. It's the principle. It's DataOps principle.
Yeah, it's the growth mindset, the safety culture, love your errors. I think those things are attitudes that can really help people. And I think it just makes your team happier. And I don't know if you've ever gone into a restaurant, and as a person who studied management, I can sort of in the first 2 or 3 minutes tell a well-run restaurant from a badly run restaurant. And it's the body posture of the people. It's the way that the water is filled quicker. And you just know that it's well run, and or it's badly run, and how clean the bathroom is. And I think I really appreciate well-run teams. And I think the way to have a well-run team is to follow DataOps principles and think about that, how your team works as a first order item. And, whether restaurants or software or data and analytics, let's create well-run teams, because it really impacts people's lives. They're just much happier. Yeah,
well, can't ask for much more than that with a team. Happy teams doing things they love. So what a great place to finish. So I'll thank you, Chris, hugely for your valuable time and thoughts and philosophies on this topic. Really, really insightful. Appreciate you coming on the show.
All right. Thank you, Jason. Thank you for the opportunity, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks a lot. And thanks everyone for listening. We'll catch you soon.
Bye.